author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
A new year dawns, and with it, a new Congress replete with hopes, dreams, and schemes for the future of politics in America. But will these elusive hopes fall by the wayside, as so many other New Year's resolutions do? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio's special New Year's edition here on the Radio American Network. I'd like to say a special thank you to our listeners out on KSRM in Kenai, Alaska on 920 AM and 92.5 FM. Thanks for being part of the team. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. A razor-thin majority for an incoming GOP-led House may throw up more problems than being in the minority party. What does the Republican Party under Kevin McCarthy hope to achieve, and what pitfalls will it face? We're very fortunate to be joined by our Liberty Nation special New Year extravaganza panel, senior analyst and longtime host of this here show, Mr. Timothy Donner, political pundit extraordinaire, Mr. Jeff Charles, and legal affairs editor, host of the excellent Uprising podcast and general man about town, Mr. Scott D. Casenza. Gents, I trust you all had a wonderful Christmas and are bracing for an exciting 2023. Now, Tim, I'd love to get started with you on this. How do you see the lay of the land for the 2023 Congress?
I see a lot of investigations. I see investigations into the Biden administration, see investigations into the Afghanistan conflict, investigations into the origins of COVID and what Fauci and company had to do with perhaps suppressing reality about the Wuhan lab. And most of all, we're going to see investigations about the Hunter Biden laptop, which more precisely should be called the Joe Biden laptop, because honestly, none of us should care if Hunter Biden is a pervert or a drug addict. What we should care about is what it reveals about his father, who happens to be the president of the United States. So it's going to be mostly investigations, because any legislation from the House will be dead on arrival at the Senate, or certainly at the White House as well, if it even comes to that. So I see mostly Mark jockeying for position for 2024.
That is actually a question I have for you specifically later, Tim, because I do want your opinion on that. Now, Jeff, I know that you have been most interested in these hearings and committees that Tim's just mentioned. Which ones in particular are capturing your attention?
Yeah, I mean, Tim kind of stole my thunder there. I mean, I think
Tim Donner, Thunder Stealer extraordinaire for 2023.
Biden laptop, because that's right, the Thunder Thief. But yeah, I mean, really, I bet. But this is going to really depend on if the president is implicated. Like, nobody cares if Hunter Biden is a crackhead. What they care about is if, his father was involved in whatever weird shenanigans he was doing overseas. But I think beyond that, I think that the investigations into the border issue is going to be, I think it's kind of a sleeper. Like, I think it's kind of flying under the radar, but I think what comes out about that is also going to be pretty significant. I mean, we just had a report out last week saying that Biden was very frustrated by the situation at the border, which is very ironic. But I think that, the fact that they've mishandled this crisis is going to play a lot into what happens in 2024. And of course, there's even the J6 committee. I mean, they're going to be investigating that. And, I know we probably shouldn't go into it too much, but I think that the investigations into the FBI, that might actually yield a lot of interesting information. And new on the docket is the Twitter files. What was the nature of the government's relationship with Twitter? We've been getting a lot of information on that from Elon Musk and Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss, and a lot of other journalists. I expect to see a lot of coverage on this. I expect to see a lot of making hay about this. So I think we're going to be in for another tumultuous year in 2023.
Yeah, we had obviously when it was a Democrat-led Congress in both chambers, we had quite a few big tech people called in to testify in front of Congress. And for some reason, I actually think it's going to be the complete opposite coming up in this session, because it doesn't seem likely to me that a Republican-led House will be that interested in taking the position, at least optically, from political optics point of view, that they are wanting to hold big tech more to account in terms of censoring misinformation, because that's really the opposite side of the argument they've put themselves on. Now, Scott, Jeff mentioned briefly there the January 6th committee stuff. And now we saw them issue some criminal referrals against former President Donald Trump, which you and I have discussed before, and that they really hold no legal weight. As I say, you have made numerous criminal referrals about things, and I could make one today, and it would have pretty much as much weight. But
Mark, I'm an American. I would hope that my criminal referral would carry much more greater.
Oh no, mine are all against
yours.
the royal family
Well,
to Scotland Yard.
I think
Prince
yours would be
Andrew
almost as valid as mine. Yeah.
Right.
So should we expect from the congressional investigations that are allegedly, apparently, we have been informed that they are coming down the road, should we expect the similar, almost pointless criminal referrals to also come out of the Republican-led Congress?
Well, that's the smart money bet, I think, Mark. Historically, as I've borne witness to, as a keen observer of these hearings and how they go back and forth, is the Republicans will exhaust people, with the pendulum on the other side of the aisle, just like the Democrats have exhausted people. It's just it's like that quick hit. We're talking about Hunter Biden, crack addiction. It is the crack of politics. It's the quick hit. They get right away. Their social media teams cut together the clip of them yelling at the challenging question, that's asked, and then they cut it up and it goes on their Twitter and YouTube feeds like so-and-so destroys Biden administration person.
Right.
That's what I expect.
Right.
We're like
this
I just
one
want to say
weird
quickly.
trick.
Yeah, right. The one weird trick. I just want to say,
I believe that's
right
for
about
medicinal advertising. Tim. I'm not sure.
It's got a lot
car
of
insurance, especially actually. But Tim's right about calling it. Not saying the Hunter Biden laptop investigation. We should be calling it the 10% for the big guy.
Right.
Investigation. Who's the big guy?
Well, according to people who would be in the know, Tony Bobolinsky, for example, that big guy is obviously Joe Biden, and that may or may not come out. I doubt anybody will ever admit it, even though it's a great nickname, right? It's the big guy.
Call Hunter Biden to testify and demand that he testify who it is, and let's open up his tax returns and make them. That to me is where I think that
that's a real test,
Republicans
isn't it?
Are going to go.
That is a real test.
This is the point.
I think really what's going to, but what's going to come out of this, though, I mean, there won't be any heads rolling because of this. I don't expect Republicans to really do a whole lot except for talk loud and say nothing, in the words of James Brown. I think that we're just going to see those clips, but nothing's really going to happen. Republicans aren't going to actually do anything. Even if they could, I don't think they would, because we've seen this movie before, right? They say all these things to get elected, and then they get into office and they do a lot of talking. They talk very well. They talk. They talk bigly. Great talking. But other than that, we're not going to see much. But it is going to possibly position them better for 2024. So who knows?
So here's
Tim,
the point.
Final word for Tim.
Here's the point that we've reached, where the Republicans now, who are motivated by revenge for the last 4 years, to prove that they'll give back to the Democrats what the Democrats gave to them. That's the big purpose of this Congress.
And politically important, I think, too.
But we've
from a
reached
broader perspective, they've got to make them pay.
Well, we've reached the point where the Republicans will probably be forming a committee to investigate the January 6th committee. That's the point, that we have the balkanization of American politics can be exemplified with that.
And that will likely be the only way that Liz Cheney ever makes it back to the lower chamber. Gentlemen, we'll be right back talking about wrapping up 2022 after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Before we look to the future, it's important to look to the past. 2022 was indeed a year of turmoil politically for all involved. But were any lessons learned? Well, we're back with our special New Year's panel, Tim Donner, Scott Cosenza, and Jeff Charles. Now, Jeff, imagine you were trying to sell the year 2022 to somebody. What would be some of the good features that you would mention, and what dark secrets might you hide?
Actually, this is going to sound crazy, but I think the biggest development that came out of 2022 was none other than Mr. Elon Musk buying Twitter and causing all kinds of commotion. I'm loving it. I'm loving every bit of it. I'm having tons of fun. He's having tons of fun. Everybody's having fun except for the people who like censorship. But as much as this is good for people who like to see those people cry, I think coming in the next year, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening with Twitter that could have an impact on even politics. Like I mentioned before, Republicans are already talking about investigations into the government's role in what Twitter was doing in the pre-Musk era. So I think that we're going to see a lot more coming down the pike. I also think some of the ideas that he has for the platform is going to give a lot more opportunities to alternative voices, more right-leaning voices, to be able to have a level playing field. He's talking about expanding the video offerings. So there's a lot that he wants to do with Twitter that I think is going to have an impact that we can't even see yet. As for what I want to hide, I'd want to hide that little crimson trickle that happened in the midterm elections.
Okay,
the
yes.
conservative king of Black Twitter 2022 sells itself, right?
Yeah, I wonder if I can get a pass to this ephemeral Black Twitter that I keep hearing about. Now, Scott, I think from a liberty perspective, there have been some wins this year, right?
I was just thinking of the word ghetto pass and what it meant before for your Black Twitter pass. I don't know why my mind went there, but in any case,
yeah, Mark's definitely got
would you repeat the question, please?
Right, from a liberty perspective, what are some of the wins of 2022, if there were any?
So for people who are pro-life, the huge win is that we will see potentially many fewer abortions going forward because of the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And of course, those people think that there is a human being a human life that is being extinguished for the most part in many of these procedures, and the liberty that those human lives have that had been extinguished will no longer be. So that's a huge win for them. Now, of course, for the pro-choicers, that's a massive loss for liberty. So
I mean, they're going to be really
coin.
disappointed they can't murder all those unborn children, right?
Or a potential loss. I mean, I actually happen to be making no one happy. I'm a pro-choicer who thinks that was correctly decided, that Roe was a bad decision. And if we want to have liberal access to abortion services in America, which I favor, we have to do it through another mechanism rather than just, for lack of a better term, just inventing the right out of whole cloth, which is what I think the court did in Roe. So we also have major wins in gun control. Boy,
you mean you major wins against gun control, surely, Scott?
Major wins for liberty against gun control.
Right.
Yes, Mark. This is the big liberty win segment. So, and we're going to have to see, in terms of in future years as to how those. It's like a pebble in a pond, right? The waves come out, and we'll have to see, how broad they reach and how tall they are when they hit the shores. But everybody in the gun rights movement is really buoyed by these recent decisions, and to the extent that the Supreme Court stays relatively stable with its members and their ideology, we expect that to continue at least for the near term.
So that's the New York Rifle and Pistol Bruin case. And sorry, just a quick recap there. So that said that what did Clarence Thomas write on that it was so interesting?
Well, it's not what that specific ruling said so much as what it did was say that we mean it. Okay, that's what really they said. So what has happened before is that the Supreme Court has articulated in the Heller case and its legacy and McDonald and others that people have an individual right to keep and bear arms, and that it's just as much of a right as other important rights that we hold that were recognized. They weren't granted, right? It's sort of an important point that we had those rights before the establishment of this republic, and they haven't been granted to us by the founding documents or the government, but that they have been reserved by us, and they must be respected by the government. But what happened is a lot of states and localities implemented all these horrible gun control rules, and they were being challenged, and because of an unwillingness by the Supreme Court previously to take some of these cases and enforce their own previous judgments in many circuits, judicial circuits in the United States covering several states, those laws weren't enforced, and people had their rights willy-nilly violated by the governments, the state and local governments. And so what we've seen now is basically turning that ship around and headed back the other direction to where we expect these governments will be required to respect and honor the Second Amendment rights of their people.
And that's no bad thing. Tim, what's your analysis here? And were any serious lessons learned by those in the DC swamp, do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what, as we went into 2022, I think there were a couple of things that were safe assumptions. Number one was that Joe Biden was very weak, very unpopular, very old, and looked very addled, and looked like he wasn't headed for a second term one way or another. The second assumption, the corollary, was that the Republicans would certainly win the House. It was just a question of how many seats above the number 20 they would win, and that Kevin McCarthy would glide into the speaker's chair. Well, now, at the end of the year, Kevin McCarthy fighting for his life, and even in becoming speaker, he would face enormous challenges from the conservative caucus, the Freedom Caucus, that's making a lot of demands in return for their crucial votes to get him across the finish line. And at the same time, Joe Biden is interpreting the 2022 midterm elections as a mandate for him to continue what he's doing. And he is now far more likely to seek a second term than he was at the beginning of the year. He thinks that he was upheld. The lesson is that the Republicans did little more than speak in aphorisms and broad, sweeping, sort of soaring language with no specifics with their commitment to America. It didn't work. Nobody bought it. And the Republicans have to learn that it's not enough to just stand there and say, oh, the Democrats are just so awful.
We have just a few seconds left, so I just want to go around the table for a end-of-year report card. Jeff, what's your scale?
You know, I will go with a B minus only because of the Supreme Court's decisions.
Okay. Scott?
F. We have we're engaged in undeclared war by proxy in the Ukraine against Russia. That alone is an F for me, to say nothing of all the other things that drag it down.
That's an F from Scott. And Tim?
Okay, Jeff, we're even because you stole my thunder this time. I give him a B minus for the same reason, because of the Supreme Court, which will continue to be the gift that keeps on giving for liberty.
Liberty indeed. And we'll be right back after this short break talking what to expect in 2023 and political New Year's resolutions. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with our special New Year's Liberty Nation panel of Tim Donner, Scott DeCosenza, and Jeff Charles. And it's time to break out the crystal balls and make some predictions on what the year ahead has in store for us. Gentlemen, I thought I might start this one off myself with a prediction that the president will demand Congress craft some legislation of some description to manage social media enterprises, specifically, obviously, with Twitter in mind. What do we think? Am I right, wrong, or somewhere in between?
That is definitely coming down the pike. I think you are 1,000% right about that. We saw over the past couple of years, Biden was really cracking down on social media companies, Twitter included, but also Facebook. He came out and said that they were killing people because they weren't censoring enough COVID-19 misinformation, quote unquote. So yeah, I do expect to see that happen.
Okay, well let's go straight back onto you then, Jeff. What do your tea leaves tell you for the year?
I am predicting a massive record level sales of popcorn. as people watch what's happening with these Republican investigations into Biden and everything else. I think it's going to be the best example of political theater. I think episode after episode is going to be even more compelling than the House Select January 6th committee. I think that's going to be the big thing.
So you're saying they're going to actually take the format of the January 6th committee, which is, that wasn't a trial, it wasn't a committee, it was a showpiece. Oh, so they'll use the same. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they may not be as good at putting on a show as Democrats, but they're going to put on a show because the content is going to be very compelling.
Well, Jeff, let's be clear that you have to remember that they didn't actually put on the show themselves. They hired an expert to produce that show.
Exactly.
That television producer they hired, and I actually don't know the answer to this. I'm sorry, I don't. But did they use public money to pay that person's salary? It's a good question, I think.
Probably.
That is a fantastic question.
The Republicans should do the same. And in fact, if he could stay out of the way, Donald Trump might be the best person. This man knows how to produce a compelling television series. So,
but you know what?
True enough.
Social media is something that was so reflexively left wing for so long that it's like when Fox News came along, the left couldn't stand the idea that there was one outlet that was conservative. One.
Tim, we're still discovering how left-wing social media will be without their thumbs on the scale. It'll be an interesting experiment, right?
This is what I mean. The Twitter thing, you can't understate the significance of it. The way I see it, Mark, is when Elon Musk took it over, if he did anything short of keeping it the way that it was, including trashing the whole thing, the country would be better off, because we see what happened when Twitter censored stories in 2020. It may very well have affected the outcome. It may have changed the outcome. So getting rid of it altogether would even be better than going back to the way it was. And of course, I think the left is kind of confused about it now, because part of them, they rely on social media, but now they hate social media in the form of a leader of social media, Twitter. So they don't know what to do. If in doubt, regulate.
Now, let's go to Scott. What do you predict for 2023, the Supreme Court, politics? What's on your plate?
Well, I think that for me, the big news in 2023 will be that the Supreme Court holds that affirmative action in higher education is violative of all the laws that prohibit it, that are already on the books, which is to say that the Civil Rights Acts that prohibit discrimination against somebody or for the discrimination on the basis of race is illegal. Right now, we have a situation where you can discriminate for somebody for preferred races, and that's not counted as against the other people that you're discriminating against, okay? But I think that's going to go away. And also, I think that beyond college admission and the universities will then reverberate out to the greater society. That's what sort of led the charge for other organizations to discriminate on the basis of race, and I think it will lead them to recede that as well. And I think that's a great movement in the country, to the extent that we can not think of people first as race or sex or any other immutable characteristic. The whole reason for these civil rights laws in the first place, I think that's a great thing, and I expect we'll see that change in 2023.
I do not suspect, however, that we will see it change in the federal government and the state governments, with specifically the state governments, with handing out.
Of it, Mark. It's got to start somewhere.
You think it will impact these universal basic income schemes that are being trotted out? I'm specifically talking on the left coast here.
Well, you have to look at where we are now and how we got there. It's a long road, okay? Bakke was 1973, which was the Supreme Court case that allowed racial discrimination in higher education. And now where we are with, the wokeism and the whatever. So could it be 50 years from a decision that reverses it? Maybe. I hope it's not that long, but these things are oil tankers. They don't turn on a dime, right? So
absolutely.
But I'm looking forward to them giving the full stop order in 2023.
Absolutely. Well, it might turn out to be an evergreen and get stuck in the Suez Canal. Tim, you can either scatter the chicken bones or use your analytic mind. What do you reckon?
I usually use my analytic mind to consider the chicken bones that are left on the plate, but be that as it may. 2023, I have sort of a 1 and 1A. Prediction 1, and we had an exclusive to this effect just last week at LibertyNation.com, that Ron DeSantis will run for president. There had been questions not about whether he will eventually run, but whether he would choose to do it in 2024 with Trump in the race. And I think he's determined that he cannot let his moment, and this is Ron DeSantis's moment after his overwhelming victory in Florida and his growing numbers among Republicans across the nation. He's not going to let Trump stand in his way, even though he knows Trump will likely devastate him, verbally at least, and try to take him down. He's already threatened to reveal information that only he has, he claims, on DeSantis. He's called him sanctimonious, et cetera, et cetera. But here's 1A in the prediction, and I'm not quite going to make this a prediction. I might put it as high as 50-50 because it makes sense if you follow it through. The ultimate Republican nightmare that Donald Trump decides to run as a third-party candidate as revenge against the Republican Party, which is increasingly unlikely to choose him as their nominee. Mike Pompeo, we have it from good sources that Mike Pompeo is going to get in January. DeSantis is going to get in. Trump looks like he's not going to be able to get the nomination, at least not a glide path. The question is, what does he do if he doesn't? And the third party scenario for him makes sense. He isn't subject to the rules and regulations of the Republican Party. He's free to be the wild card that he really always has been. And if he plucks off 20% of the vote, Joe Biden is a lock for a second term.
I predict that if he does that, he'll be buried under the prison because there's enough people with enough power that want to go after Trump that if all the Republicans that are still left after he moves away from the party turn their back on him, he's going to have some existential problems in America.
Oh, yes, he may get
some of those Republicans might actually join in on the effort to make sure he serves time.
I think
maybe Ron DeSantis decides whether or not the games he played with the zoning board in Palm Beach to get that Mar-a-Lago, that shuffle he did with, whether it was a residence or not.
I don't know what's going on
that can be pulled against
with these people. Mike Lindell, who is the most pro-Trump person in the entire country, the My Pillow guy, he just came out last week and said he questions DeSantis's victory in Florida by 19 points. He questions the Dade County vote. He is a Trump loyalist. So you see that Trump is starting to emit stuff about other candidates.
I did a year-end roundup on Liberty Nation the other day, the state of political play based on betting odds and poll numbers. And obviously you have Joe Biden underwater by more than by 9 points. Kamala Harris underwater by 15. Donald Trump underwater by 19.6%. Right. Ron DeSantis plus 5.2 nationally. He's the only major national figure with a net positive approval. That does give you some hints as towards the direction of the country.
The real money bettors have said DeSantis is their favorite.
Yes,
DeSantis putting their own money at risk.
Right.
DeSantis is now favored by the cash money bettors to both secure the GOP nomination and
you can only expect
Joe
that
Biden.
Trend to accelerate as the year goes along, I think. And DeSantis, if he picks his spot, to me, likely goes in the spring or early summer. By that time, you will be able to see how the Trump candidacy is playing after about 6 months.
All right, gents, we will check back in on these predictions as the year moves on. Now, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back talking political New Year's resolutions with our special New Year's Liberty panel. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With a new year beginning, many of us see this as an opportunity for a clean slate, a tabula rasa, if you will, and often make resolutions. Now, we're joined by our special Liberty Nation panel, Jeff Charles, Scott Cosenza, and Tim Don, a longtime host of this here radio show, to hear either what resolutions they've set for themselves or what resolutions they think our political overlords should or could adopt. Tim, let's start with you.
Well, I've got 2 New Year's resolutions, not in this particular order. One of them is to respond to how I, like so many others, bought the narrative that the Republicans were ready to, basically for a red wave, that I'm going to try to listen more to my own voice and be more skeptical about what I'm hearing in terms of conventional wisdom, because I think I'm hardly alone. I think it was almost everybody, with a few exceptions, that bought that narrative. And I think more independent thinking is something that we could all benefit as writers. That's my first one. My second one is that I'm going to eat more veggies. But I'm only going to fulfill one of those 2 promises. So I'll leave it to you to decide which one is
Tim,
more likely for me to
this is not
fulfill.
Reagan rules. Ketchup does not count as a vegetable for these argument purposes. All right?
I've got an expanded list of eligible food items, Scott. I mean, depends what the meaning of vegetable is.
Yeah, we're not going to count French fries or ketchup, and the doctors don't allow that.
I don't know, Scott. We're going to have to take that one to the podcast and discuss it.
Well, I do notice that the plant-based meat alternatives have been taking a real nosedive on the stock markets recently. And I think what it is, despite having a lot of science behind the food technology, some great advertising, and a lot of activists pushing it, I suspect, and I don't know this for sure because I have never bitten that particular bullet, is that they just don't taste that good. So, Scott, maybe perhaps follow Jordan Peterson's and Michaela Peterson's lessons and stick with the meat there. Scott, let's move on to you. New Year's resolutions for yourself or for our political, let's call them leaders.
2 for myself. The first is to eat more foie gras. I want to support our nation's foie gras producers.
Okay, Scott, I'll go along with it.
Who are now
okay.
There's a new ban. I think it's in New York, perhaps. If not, I got that wrong. It's another northeastern state dominated by liberals in governance who have forbidden the sale of foie gras there.
I wish they were still liberals.
Yeah, well, certainly. And the funny thing is the best foie gras in the States that I know of comes from New York. There's a well-regarded foie gras ranch or farm or whatever you call it on Long Island.
I assume you're talking upstate rather than New York City there, because I don't think there's that many geese, right?
It's
one of the old Long Island, before they got kind of invaded by all the the people from Manhattan and the world, really. But
okay, foie gras on the menu.
2 is to establish to learn where I might establish a second residency if the politicians of the United States ruin this place anymore with their regulations and taxes and every other thing, that I have a solid foundation on where I might go ahead to exfiltrate to.
Okay, and obviously don't mention that on any particular broadcast because they will find out where you are, Scott. What about you, Jeff? What are your resolutions for the coming year?
Yeah, I'll say what with Scott is don't let Taylor Lorenz find out where you move to. Just make sure that doesn't happen.
How do you stop her?
Well, I mean, she's apparently, from what I hear on the internet, she's incredibly old, so she won't be around for that much longer, right?
Yeah.
For that was for the old joke, by the way, not for her not being around. I have no ill will towards. Yeah. I don't want to be a focus of some investigation.
All right, Jeff.
For me, politically, 2023, I'm going to be focusing on liberty. I'm going to be focusing more local. I'm doing a little bit of a pivot. I've had a little dark night of the soul politically. So coming up this next year, my focus is going to be liberty, and I really want to focus local and personally and politically do what I can on the ground to help move liberty forward.
Okay, that's a pretty good. That's a nice, worthwhile, clean cut gold there, Jeff. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, no foie
Yeah,
gras.
surprised. Like, you thought I was going to make like some weird joke or something. The fact is, I couldn't think of one.
Declare yourself crown emperor of Black Twitter.
We're going to feed Jeff plenty of foie gras in 2023 too. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I don't know if they allow black anarchists on Black Twitter, but we'll see.
Well, this is why I say you need to declare yourself Emperor Xerxes of Twitter. Right? That's your new Twitter handle, Xerxes Jeff on the right. Okay, gents, if we were giving resolutions to our political, again, let's call them leaders, what piece of advice would you give them for the new year? Just a quick round the table. Tim, your person and the advice you would give.
Well, let's stick with the Donald Trump theme here that I've been running through most of this program. My hope is that Donald Trump would resolve to support the Republican nominee for president, whether it's
himself or someone else.
Whether it's him or someone else. I think he could commit to supporting himself if he's the nominee. I'm pretty confident of that. But whether he could support DeSantis or company, that is a critical question, because if he works against them just to get revenge, he's going to send Biden or his designated successor to the White House for 4 more years. I'm not saying that that's a resolution that Donald Trump has made or even will make, but one that he should make for the sake of himself, the party, and he can still be very influential in the Republican Party in a positive way.
Okay.
If he chooses to.
And Scott, who would you advise?
Well, I think that the person most in need of advice would be the incoming Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Oh, Donald Trump.
Whomever that may be.
Whoever that may be. Or, of course, Kevin McCarthy is in place for that. Yeah.
Is there a possibility that may not happen, or is that dead set at this point?
Yes, there is a possibility.
Yeah, that's why I phrased it that way. And I would encourage them to read the Constitution of these United States. That would be my best advice for them, because unfortunately, all Congresses in my lifetime pass a massive quantity of legislation that is on its face unconstitutional, and that it's impractical to follow the Constitution and have fidelity towards it is not an acceptable argument. You know, I'm mindful of Rand Paul's bringing out the spending bill and saying how they had a couple hours to vote on it. That any congressperson would ever vote on something they haven't read, I think, is a violation of their oath of office. And I, again, say it's not an acceptable rebuttal to that statement to say it's impractical to require them to read the legislation they pass. Impracticality be damned.
All right. And Jeff, a quick but final word from yourself.
You know, I guess it's not to any one person, but from where I sit, I mean, the federal government's gone. They're just going to keep growing the government and growing the government. Like I said before, the focus should be local. So I would say to any liberty-minded candidates, regardless of party, doesn't matter which party, liberty-minded candidates at the local level, run for those local seats. Get in there and apply the principle.
Supporting Mark Angelides for dog catcher, federal dog catcher for the entire
Scott's
United
already
States
running for
year.
Speaker of the House.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that.
Yeah, he's already got a nascent campaign.
All right, gentlemen, thank you ever so much. I wish you a very happy new year, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
All that remains is for me to thank our special guests, Tim Donner, Jeff Charles, and Scott D. Cosenza for joining us, and to wish all of you out there in Radioland and beyond the very happiest of New Year's. I think perhaps I'll leave you with the words of author and thinker G.K. Chesterton, who warned, the object of a new year is not that we should have a new year, it's that we should have a new soul. And I think those are words to live by. Happy New Year to you all. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5 is the Left-Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh.
Heard it here first.
Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.